Lovie Smith has coached his way and talked his way into being fired by the Houston Texans organization. Listen to some of the comments from Lovie Smith yesterday as he was talking about a game in which the Texans trailed 30-0 at halftime, and the opposing team benched their quarterback in the third quarter. Listen to Lovie Smith as he says, well, we can find some positives in this loss.
I thought we had a chance. Right before, we turned over the ball that last time, if we had, gotten it in the end zone, now it's a one-score game. So with everything that happened, we can at least at the end feel like we made progress. We understand what the record is. It don't really matter unless you get a win, and we didn't get that. But we have to find things to build on right now.
Felt like they were in it. How'd you feel at halftime when you were losing 30-0? How'd you feel when Skylar Thompson was the opposing quarterback played by the Dolphins, not Tua Tagovailoa, the MVP candidate? How'd you feel, Lovie? But he went on as he was asked more questions, and he said, it's great to see the second half after the bad first half.
On games like today, when you're down 30-0 at the half, you have to look for positives. And could have gone, of course, two different ways in the second half. And I like the way the guys fought in the second half. You couldn't let them score anymore. I don't think they scored in the second half. And offensively, we were able to get a little bit going in the passing game.
They didn't score in the second half. Lovie Smith's factually correct. Could that have been because they started playing their backup quarterback, Skylar Thompson, who would make the Kansas State Wildcats team, of which he played with last year, a worse football team if he was the quarterback? But Lovie Smith said he's not worried about what Miami does. He's worried about the Houston Texans.
We didn't win the football game. We're not patting ourselves on the back, but we're looking for positives as we go forward. We're not there yet. That is obvious to everyone. But we have to talk about what happened during the game, not based on who they played or any of that, just basing it on how the game ended up. Simple as that.
How about you figure out how the game starts? You don't lose the game by halftime by being 30-0. How about you make the game competitive enough that the opposing team can't bench their MVP candidate at quarterback and start a backup quarterback that most of us would guess fake guy if we were playing real guy, fake guy, dead guy. How about that, Lovie Smith? To go in there, and yes, it could have gone one of two ways in the game. And I suppose the don't quit aspect of it is a positive for you, Lovie Smith. It could have also gone one of two ways at the podium, Lovie Smith, and it went the wrong way at the podium. Walking to that microphone and forming his mouth to say the words that he was happy with how they played in the second half when they played one of the worst first halves in franchise history is grounds for termination. It is grounds for firing Lovie Smith. This team has taken a significant step back over the course of this season. Lovie Smith has been the guy in charge of a team that is poorly coached and is worse than when David Culley coached this team a year ago with less talent. They also don't play as hard for Lovie Smith as they do for David Culley a year ago. Lovie Smith is a worse head coach than David Culley. Lovie Smith has been a losing head coach for the majority of his career and the majority of his recent time in football. You cannot continue to have this person around your organization, especially if they can't get the little things right, like saying, we did a bad job, which is what Lovie Smith tried to avoid doing throughout most of the time when he was asked questions yesterday.
What is this, high school? We're trying to find positives when the team's down 30-0 at halftime? Well, they trailed 20-0 last week against Washington. These teams stop trying. These teams don't care about the second half. They don't want to get hurt. They take their foot off the gas pedal because they know they're playing a garbage football team that's poorly coached. And let me ask you this, Cody. Which young players in this team are getting better under Lovie Smith and this coaching staff that he hired? Which young players? The quarterback's regressed. He's not even playing anymore. Jalen Petrie seems like he's regressed. Damian Pierce can't get more than 10 yards in the game now. I don't put it all on him, but it just seems like all these young players, even the draft class from last year besides Davis Mills.
They had two healthy scratches from the draft class last year, and they benched the defensive tackle that started the year. Guys have taken significant steps back, not to mention veterans that Lovie Smith went to bat for, seemingly in the offseason, showing up and just being terrible football
So
players.
it's not even just being bad, because no one expected. I know you had them winning 7 games, but BK and I thought they'd win around 5. I had them going over their win total of 4.5. They won 4 last year. It's the fact that they're significantly worse. They're poorly coached. They're not playing close games like they were last year at certain points. And David Culley is proving out to be a better head coach, because guess what? David Culley didn't want to fire Tim Kelly. We thought that was nuts. Pep Hamilton makes Tim Kelly look like Andy Reid calling the plays. I mean, let's call for what it is. This offense stinks, and they have more talent on this offense this year than they did last year. So I don't know how you keep Lovie Smith from an on-field standpoint. And then you have some of the audio we just played at the press conference yesterday. There's what he pulled last week, where he's getting into it with Brian T. Smith, Brian Chahala Smith. Then you get into what he was saying in this press conference yesterday. This was Lovie Smith trying to basically argue that, well, Tua didn't play in the second half, but we still went out there and we played great football.
We play the Miami Dolphins, whoever they have out there. In the second half, whoever they chose to play, I saw progress on our part. That's what I saw. Based on what they did, I can't, judge that. I saw progress at the end, and we moved the football and had a chance before that last interception. That's what I saw. Were you watching the same game? I guess not.
I mean, for him to try and go after the reporter who asked the question, I think it was Brooks Cabini of the Chronicle, basically being like, you're talking about all these positives. Can you acknowledge that the MVP-level quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, Tua, did not play most of the second half? He refused to do it. And this, Cody, was the worst part, and I think Cal McNair, who was sitting in that interview room, hopefully heard this loud and clear when he makes the decision on Lovie Smith at the end of the year. The bizarre chastising of several reporters as they tried to ask more questions to Lovie Smith.
Let's have somebody else. We can turn this into you and me forever. Let's let someone else ask a couple questions, and then we'll come back to you. How about that? We'll get you. We're not going to leave until you. Let's let everybody else, and we'll come back to you. All right? And, Jonathan, I can figure out who I want to answer to. I don't need your help with that. Thank you. Does anyone else have another question first?
I got a question.
All right. And then we'll come back to you. How's that, Brooks? Is that okay with you, John?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, Brooks Cabina is like one of the nicest people in town. For him to go after Brooks for trying to ask follow-up questions to the asinine statements that Lovie has said, and we played it for you at the beginning of the segment if you've been listening, it's just nonsense. You're going after Brooks Cabina for having the audacity to say, hey, Lovie, when you talk about all these positives, you have to kind of acknowledge that the Dolphins stopped trying, that the Dolphins didn't play Tua. I mean, that was the lowest of low for Lovie Smith to try and go after Brooks Cabina for doing his job, Lovie Smith. And he's been a head coach 3 times in the NFL. He coached in Chicago, for crying out loud. If he thinks the Houston media is too tough, my goodness.
I mean, Brooks Cabina is not a guy that's asking sensational questions. Brooks Cabina is not a guy that is asking questions that are out of line. Brooks is asking questions the Texans fans have. And I get there's less Texans fans than there used to be based on the results that this team has put together. But there's still fans that want to know, how are you going to get this right? And when Lovie Smith's up there saying, well, let's just kind of ignore the first half. Let's talk about how much better we played in the second half. Let's talk about the second half and the positives that we had when the backup quarterback was in the game. Like, you have a very clear question of, well, why are you ignoring the first half and praising the second half? Like, being good when the game is over is not the objective of the team. Being good from the start is the objective of the team. And you failed miserably multiple times over the course of this season. And your explanations for why it's going to change or how it's going to change are not fulfilling the needs of the fan base.
We could debate whether or not Nick Caserio should get another crack at hiring yet another head coach, but bringing back Lovie Smith is insulting to this fan base because you're going nowhere with this guy. And you want Bryce Young to be coached by that dude or by Pep Hamilton, even if you bring in a different play caller. If Lovie's not your long-term answer at head coach, and I don't think anyone in the city believes he is, then eventually you're going to fire that play caller because the next head coach is going to want his new guy, and then you're giving Bryce Young a new offense to learn. Like, you got to think, if you're Cal McNair, long and hard about whether or not you just pull the plug on everything going on right now and you bring in qualified people to run your franchise when you have salary cap space for the first time in years, you have draft capital, and most importantly, that draft capital might be the first pick of the draft where you get your future franchise quarterback. You got to think long and hard about keeping both Lovie and, of course, Nick Caserio as well.